Hello everyone, I hope that you're all doing great today. I've still not recovered as much as I thought I had from my flu, so I've not been able to record as many stories as I wanted, but within the next week I'm certain that my voice is going to be back to normal. So I hope you enjoyed these stories and I hope that everybody's doing great. Take care and I'll speak to you all soon. Before I'd eventually become a park ranger, I was a scout. I actually went on some summer trips to get some training in, and just try and get used to the great outdoors a bit more. I'd always thoroughly enjoyed these trips. I remember though that my view of this changed when I got older. Now let me explain. My father had also worked as a scout leader, so I didn't really feel uncomfortable being in those kind of environments. I pretty much had all of the work to do with my dad at home. He would really teach me the most. We would go on lots of trips together, out into the woods, so that way I could get accustomed and acclimatized to it. I'd actually known for a long time that I'd want to work as a park ranger when I got older, and my dad actually really helped and supported me with this. I found having a strong figure like that in my life definitely helped me. He could always give me guidance and the confidence whenever I needed it. He also seemed to be able to sense good things were happening when they were. I haven't really met anybody else similar. My dad actually says that he can sense paranormal and things like that, which he's also kind of evidenced before. He might be able to walk into a place which is old and say, "I don't like this room." And then later, we'd find out that the room was haunted supposedly and things like that. So I'd always really trusted my dad. And I remember, like I said, one specific event happening which I couldn't explain with my father. This is a digression from the main story, but I think it's quite interesting to share it. Now this happened when we went out together, and my dad wanted to show me how to do some hunting. We'd always bring some supplies with us, but he always emphasized the importance of making sure that you had more than enough and that you didn't leave anything out there. He said there's nothing worse than being hungry out here. Apparently you couldn't always hunt when you needed to, and also if you went into certain areas you couldn't just take what you wanted from the land. That was mind-blowing for me at the time because I just wasn't used to there being rules. I thought you could do whatever you wanted because in my young mind nobody owned this land, but of course I was wrong. I remember we set out, and my dad seemed to be a little bit confused. He kept on repeating again and again that no, this isn't where we should be. We should be somewhere different by now. This is before we had smartphones or GPS, so he was constantly looking down at a map. I tried to look and help, but I could make literally no sense of the thing whatsoever. But we were certainly lost. We'd only been out here for about an hour or two, which was especially strange. Now, eventually, we seem to be able to figure out roughly where we are, but the more that we go on, the more my dad tells me that no, we're just not where we should be. I've never really seen my father panic before, so I guess it was a little bit weird seeing him starting to. Then again, we'd only been out here for about half an hour or so before eventually we find our way back. What was weird is that it seemed very dark, almost like it was about to rain. We've been so focused on getting ourselves back out of here that we hadn't really noticed it until now. Really weird. That's when my dad looks at his clock and he's absolutely shocked. 12 hours have passed since we've been out there. It'd literally been about an hour according to me and my dad, or maybe an hour and a half. There was no way that 12 hours could have passed in that short amount of time. My dad kept checking on his watch to make sure it was working, hitting it a few times. We then get back into his car and yep, 12 hours times passed and it was truly nightfall, not just the weather changing. That was extremely weird. I still can't explain it to this day. It's almost like we stepped into another reality and time had kind of warped around us. I don't know how to explain it, but it was definitely weird. Now for my main story, like I said, I was pretty big into the Boy Scouts, and I remember one group that I'm never going to forget. I'd been sent away there one summer to spend about a month with them, and I said goodbye to my mum and dad and excitedly went forward. I was very excited to collect all of the badges and do all of the challenges because in my mind it was accelerating my career. I remember the first couple of days went pretty well and nothing seemed to be too far out of the ordinary. However, strange things started occurring. Every so often they would go away from where I was and they would just do weird things. I mean, they would just act weird and say weird things that I didn't understand. In my young mind, I presumed that this is because they're talking in another language and it's one that I'm not used to. I was probably about 13 or 14 at the time, so I was definitely young, but again, I wasn't too fazed by this. So I thought not much of it. Now after a couple of weeks, I kept on getting this burning smell in my tent. I'd wake up in the night time, and sometimes I could have swore that I'd see movement. I just couldn't explain it. I'd wake up in the morning and I'd ask the team if anybody had went anywhere, but they'd reassure me that no, nobody went anywhere and just going back to sleep was the best thing I could do, so I did. There was a few other kids there too, but they basically slept through everything, and I basically start to doubt whether it's in my head or not. I had some good intelligence at the time to realise something was off, but I kind of pushed this away from the forefront of my mind. So we go out one day again, and while walking through the woods, I do notice that there's other people coming in the opposite direction. I think we're out to do fishing or something like this that day, I couldn't remember, but they were dressed pretty weird. They were also carrying something that stunk. I went to wave at them and one of the others said, no, it's fine. I then realised that he knows these people, and again, it kind of reassured me, but I didn't really trust it for some reason. There was about 5 of them walking in a row, holding something carried on their shoulders which was tied in but covered in a bag, so I couldn't tell what it was. So they go off. So now, we get to the fishing spot, and again, nothing's too weird. We just get on with our things, and that's when I start speaking to some of the other kids there. They say apparently that they've heard some weird things in the night now. Finally, I'm not alone. I say, what did you hear? And they say that they've heard screaming and even seen blood and things like that around where we were camping, and strange markings. I don't know what to think of it, and I think maybe somebody got hurt out in the woods or something. But I was so confident being with this group of adults that I presumed that nothing could hurt me and that it's all in my head. So I decided not to tell the others about the weird things that I had been noticing too. I was actually a little bit annoyed that nobody said anything to me earlier. Like, why did everybody else seem to know of these other things but me? Strange, I think. Now we go on for almost the last week, and I'm then awoken in the night by something else strange. I hear a constant whacking sound. It's like somebody punching a tree with a metal glove. It's almost like not as strong as a hammer, but not much else, if that makes sense. It sounded like a thud, but it was just off. I then wake up in the night and I go to try and figure out what this is. I slowly peer out of my tent, and further up ahead, I can see something crazy happening. I can literally see some kind of animal laying there on the ground which has clearly passed away, blood absolutely everywhere, then people dancing around it. I can now make out the reason that I'm hearing the thudding sound. Somebody's beating a drum. I think it's crazy, but being so scared I just go back to sleep. When I woke up in the morning, I didn't want to go outside of my tent, but I really needed more water, so that forces me out. One of the leaders there asks why I'm late, and I start explaining what I heard, and he looks a little bit weird about it. He says, I don't know, can you describe them? And he looks at me weirdly, and he says, don't think too much about it. I now realise that something's really off here. So we go on for another few days, and eventually, my dad appears out of nowhere. Now, I don't know why he come, but he says that he needs to take me home because of some kind of family emergency. So, I head off home with my dad. It turned out somebody in our family got quite unwell very quickly, and we had to see them overnight, but luckily they were fine. Now everything's normal for the next couple of years, and that's when I asked my dad about the group much later. The more I explain it to him, the more concerned he looks, and I say, yeah, there was just something odd about the group. He then asks me to detail what had happened, and he looks at me very weirdly, and he says, son, I'm so sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I then ask him to explain more, and he says that I think I've made a horrible mistake. He then does some researching and looking round, and it turned out that there was an occult operating out in the woods where I went, and there were some people which were pretending to be Boy Scout leaders that were actually trying to recruit young children into their cult. Now, it absolutely blew my mind when I heard this. I can never be 100% sure that that is what happened to me, but from what I saw and heard, it seems very likely that that was the case. My dad coming over there that time probably saved me from God knows what happening to me. When I was 18, a friend and I were sitting on her couch watching TV. Suddenly, I get a strange feeling that I should turn around. Behind us, on the left, was a closed window, the shades shut and drapes drawn. It was night time. Then out of nowhere, this variant white orb, which is 6 inches or so in diameter, comes bursting through the closed windows, blinds and drapes, and makes no sounds. The orb hovered in the rear of the room for a couple of seconds, then darts left and right, and then turned around, returning to where it came from. I don't know what to think, and realised that my friend is actually looking in the same direction. We said nothing for a couple of moments, and then I asked, "Did you see that?" "Yeah," she said. We returned to watching television. I don't believe this was a ghost. I believe it was in some part of a UFO, some intelligent device used to search and evaluate locations and entities. I don't know, it was really weird. All of this took place in New York too, but I don't know what to think of it. Now, a few years ago, my friends and I went on a 45-mile, 3-night kayaking trip down the Green River in Kentucky, which runs above the Mammoth Cave System, the world's longest known cave system with more than 400 miles of passageways. We brought everything that we needed with us in our kayaks and one canoe, thus food, tents, water filtration, etc., and camped on one side of the river when it starts to get dark. We decided that we should find some level enough ground though. Now the first night was uneventful, except to say that there is nothing like a wall of fireflies against a mountainous black tree line at night in the middle of nowhere. The second day around sunset, after a long day of kayaking and baking in the July heat, we come upon a stream on the bank that opened up into a large ravine. The stream, as we found out, was a caving spring, pouring out blue freezing cold water into a lagoon. It's about 30 feet wide and so deep the blue water turned black after a few feet. The lagoon had a long sandy beach, secluded by hills on either side of a tall overhanging cliff behind and above us. It's beautiful, otherworldly like. Time moves slowly there. We decided to camp there for the night. The sand was soft, white and very fine. It's really ideal for good sleeping. Now, for some reason, the place deeply scares me, but I didn't speak up. We're all tired and everybody's having fun. We built a small fire and enjoy stargazing through the leaf canopy for a while before everybody has to go to bed. I slept hard that night. At around 5 a.m, I woke up with the urge to relieve myself. Now it was still dark. I actually have the tent door basically halfway popped out, and I stick my head out and I hear a loud scream and roar sound, I immediately cowed back into the tent and zipped it up close, and I then waited. The scream came from about 10 feet to my left, near the dwindling fire. It was high-pitched, but not like an owl screech. It was wretched, a pain scream with a lower pitch at the end. Being that we're in the middle of nowhere in Kentucky, it's likely a fox or boar or some kind of bird. Whatever it was, I laid awake for an hour listening. I heard absolutely nothing though. Now granted, we're on a soft beach, but I didn't hear a single twig snap or leaf crinkle until eventually whatever it was shuffled away. It's so bizarre. I should mention at this time that up the beach and off the side of the lagoon was a small dry cave opening, maybe 3 feet wide. I cannot say with any certainty that it was not some ancient cave-dwelling creature that seemed to live there and surfaced to see us. I eventually somehow fall asleep again and awoke the next morning shaken. I then began asking my friends if they've heard the terrible sounds, but nobody has. We then passed down the Green River. The third night at dusk, we come upon a large rocky beach. We pulled our boats ashore and decided that this would have to do, as we didn't want to go further down the river risking being stuck on the water at dark. This rocky beach was where the river split into two, and in the middle formed a collection of pale rocks, tall grass and dried out wood, and a desolate pile of muck the size of a football field. The landmass was covered in jumping sand spiders and tiny frogs, again otherworldly. We set up camp, ate, and went to bed around the same time. It was silent for probably 20 or 30 minutes, I'm not sure. I was asleep, and so were most of the others. Suddenly, my dream was interrupted by what sounded like a booming loud, mechanical wooden beast. I woken up and shot up straight. It was truly the loudest thing I've ever heard. It sounded honestly like a massive bulldozer tearing down a huge steel and wooden building, and then come a boom. It was followed by its echo throughout the river valley. The animals shifted, and the birds flew away. We were all awoken by the crash and yelling in confusion at our other tents. Nothing but silence follows outside, and nobody was particularly willing to shine a light towards whatever that was. Eventually we agree it's probably a tree and go back to sleep. The next morning, the more I thought about it, it didn't sound like a tree. I must stress it had a metallic quality, and it was projected purposefully, almost like a roar. In the morning light, we find no evidence of anything out of the ordinary, nor any obvious trees that have fallen which could have made such a sound, so we pack up and headed out onto the river one last time to head home. My friends and I still speak about the trip and the weird things that happened. We did the same kayak trip a couple of years later and nothing out of the ordinary happened. No mysterious forest sounds, to both my disappointment and relief. I grew up in a very small rural town in Michigan. This place was so small that everybody knew everyone. My high school graduation class consisted of less than 30 people. It was a place with a very small population, but geographically, it wasn't small at all, consisting mostly of wooded areas and open fields. Houses are spread out, and nothing like what you see in the city. I mean, the nearest city was hours away. I lived on a dead-end gravel road. My neighbour's at the very end of the road, and to my left, there's about a 5-minute walk before you meet the others. You could barely see the neighbour's house through the sparse trees. To the right is another neighbour. My uncle and aunt and my favourite cousin actually live about 5 minutes away. I could only see their house if I walked to the end of my driveway. My house was the second to last one on the road, and just before my house was a really long driveway. I suppose you could call it another road, but it led directly to a house behind mine that belonged to a man I'll call Dave. Now there's a large open field, followed by another sparse tree line, and Dave's house is behind that. I could easily see his small house perched on the top of a tiny hill in the distance. I loved growing up there. It was my favourite place in the world. My mum and dad worked in town, and my older brother, my younger sister and I were always left to our own devices growing up. We were always playing outside. My siblings and I are all born within the first half of the 90s, so we grew up during a time where there weren't really cell phones. We didn't have cable TV, just a few channels when we got an antenna. And our parents usually kicked us out of the house from sunrise to sunset because they didn't want us being stuck indoors. Because of this, we often explored the land around the area. Being 90s babies, our parents for some reason trusted us to literally wander everywhere. Never once did they check up on us. Now the house behind us was extremely creepy. We rarely saw anyone come or go, and believe me, they were very nosy and would know if somebody was driving down the road. The upstairs bedroom window overlooked the front of the house, and my sister upstairs' window overlooks the back of the house. We also had a giant set of sliding glass doors at the back of our house that opened up to the back door porch. They were so big it practically took up the whole wall, so we literally saw everything. Despite the neighbour behind us rarely being seen going anywhere or seeing anyone show up there, we just knew he was creepy. We used to call him Creepy Dave, and still do to this day, including my parents. I can't really explain why we started to call him that, but it seems so fitting. We used to walk through the field and along the tree line towards Dave's house. We were careful not to walk all the way up the driveway. We'd usually just play near the tree line and the fields around the area. The fields are owned by a local farm, family friends or my parents, so we weren't exactly trespassing onto Dave's property if we stayed just far enough down. Sometimes we would get a little brave and creeped up the road more. I can remember inside the ditches leading up to his driveway, there would be animal bones, fully intact skeletons, even a deer skull. It had all been there long enough to be pure bone. That alone was creepy enough for young kids to see. When I was in middle school, Dave married this woman. I can't remember for the life of her name, but she had 2 children, a daughter I'll call Lisa and son I'll call Dustin. Now they started to ride the bus with me and my siblings to school. They always hated it when the bus drove up the eerie driveway to their house. I can remember one winter, the bus actually got stuck in the snow. The bus driver had to try and shovel us out, and while everyone was stuck waiting for the bus, I happened to look out the window at the barn near the house. It was still dark out, but just starting to turn to dawn, so the sky was bluish, but still dark, and you can see silhouettes. I kid you not, standing there on the second level of the barn, there's Creepy Dave holding a pitchfork. He's not even doing anything, he's just staring at us watching. All I can see is his outline. It frightens me so much that I turn my whole body away from the window and start tearing up a bit. My best friend sitting next to me says what's wrong, and I can't even tell her. I don't know what it was, but it scared me so badly. I don't know if anybody else saw him up there, but I still picture it. That was the last time I actually saw Dave for myself, but unfortunately, he didn't disappear fully from our lives. I used to stay up late in middle school watching movies and reading. I've always been a night owl, and sometimes my sister and I would stay up on the weekends all night watching films. One night it's very late. After 3 AM, my sister had fallen asleep, but I was still awake. All of a sudden, we hear a very loud pounding coming from the door that led to our garage. We had a huge bay window in the living room, and a front door to the left of it. Our garage was on the right. Our window faces a driveway, and we have multiple dogs, so whoever this was come from behind the house, crept into our garage so the dogs don't know. I was so scared. My sister starts crying. I started screaming for my dad. He come running out of his bedroom in his underwear holding a shotgun. He went to the door and it's Dave's wife, crying hysterically. I have no idea what happened, but my dad never even told me, and the cops show up. Over time, this happened a few more times. It got to the point where my sister and I stopped sleeping in the living room. And eventually one night, my dad told Dave's wife she needs to stop coming running to our home for help and needed to go to the other neighbours. Thinking back, I feel bad, but my dad was clearly worried about us. These occurrences stopped for a while until one morning I walked downstairs to SWAT vans parked around the road, men in uniforms with vests and guns crouching in the backyards, and they're pointing directly towards Dave's house. I freaked out. I ran into the living room, into the front entrance, and my dad was standing there with a sheriff. The sheriff had been telling my dad that during the night, Dave held his wife and daughter at gunpoint. I'm not sure where her son was, but he hadn't been there. Eventually, this man in his drunken fit of rage blacked out and passed out, and the wife and daughter escaped. I'm still not sure which neighbour they went to, but the cops are called. Upon getting there, he actually shot at them, and that's when the SWAT was called in. I suppose sneaking through my yard across the field was their way to get an element of surprise, but hell, how is a young girl supposed to know what to do when all this is going on? Dave went to prison and I have no idea of the outcome, nor his family. The kids never went back to school. Apparently he's out now but never come back here. All I know is his creepy house is still there, and it's been abandoned for ages. This was a few years ago during my freshman year of college. A couple weeks into school, this girl I had class with asked me if I wanted to go to a concert. She'd been given 2 tickets as a gift, and still being early in the school year, I didn't really have friends, nor did she, so we decided to go. We live in a large city, and the concert was in a small town about an hour away by train. We get to know each other on the way there, and by the time we get off the train, it's very dark. The street lamps are sparse. We're dressed in our outfits for the concert, and the venue's about a 10-minute walk away. Neither of us had ever been out of town before, and we're having some trouble using Google Maps to figure out what direction to head in. I, generally being pretty wary of strangers, am content to continue struggling with my phone map. However, my new friend decides to ask a man on the street for help. He looks like he's in his 30s, about 6 feet tall, blonde, and he's wearing a suit with no tie, and the top couple of buttons are undone. He tells us he knows where the venue is and can get us there. He says, do we want to walk? Now he says what are our names and how old are we, and where are we from. Not necessarily creepy, but I'm getting a bad vibe. It's dark. The streets become practically empty from the train station. We end up reaching an intersection, and he starts to turn right. I'd continued to look on Google Maps once we started walking, and having become better orientated, we're now moving. I know that we need to take a left. I say this, but he says, nah, you're wrong. And I say I'm looking at the map, but he says it must have gotten confused. We turn left and he continues walking with us, assuring us that now he knows where he's going. The map says a concert's up ahead, and in the distance, I can see people all heading in the same direction. Again, our guide says that this is wrong, and he starts walking into a very secluded area near the woods. My friend is starting to get worried, and looks very superstitious. I'm gonna leave that in. My friend has also become suspicious, and we tell him that we're gonna continue straight. He insists that the venue is through the parking lot, and when we point out to the people up ahead, he says it's a shortcut, it's much quicker. We thank him for his help and keep walking. As we leave him, he stands there in the parking lot yelling, "You guys are gonna get lost. You need help." Luckily, he didn't follow us and stopped yelling once we got closer to the crowd. We got to the venue soon after, had a great time at the concert, and I'm scared he'd be waiting for us. Luckily he never found us again. I'm positive if we went into the woods something very bad would have happened. My family and I have been hunting on the same property in East Texas for over 10 years. I love Texas. And we've had some really creepy encounters with some of the locals. This property we hunt on is timber company land. It's way off the beaten path down some dirty roads. No power, no running water, no sewer. There's only a few people that live in the area, only scattered around some hunting camps. Our closest neighbours live in a trailer about a mile away, and we've come to call this a meth house. Now I'm not sure if it's really a meth house, but it wouldn't be hard to believe that was happening there. Now this place has always been odd. There is a trailer sitting in the middle of a pine clearing. The brush is fairly overgrown around the trailer, almost as if the property is abandoned. There have always been broken down cars and other junks grown around the front. Cow skulls and hip bones are attached to a pine tree going off about 20 feet. It started out maybe 10, and over the 10 years has grown out to about 20. Now for a long time, the strangest thing about that place is the vibe you get. In 2017, things get weirder. The front yard collection began to grow. A rotted out taxidermy of wild hogs was added to the skull tree. A doll's head was fixed with horns onto some kind of stick in the ground, which we called the devil baby. There's 3 tripods about 12 feet high, each erected around the trailer made out of pine trunks. One day when we drove by, we noticed that from one of these tripods hung the spinal column and rib cage of we don't know what. We thought originally they were using the tripods to hang and clear deer, but the same bones have been hung there for over a year now, and someone would usually get rid of this. So, we've had no encounters with the residents and don't even know what they look like or if they actually lived there long term. This place was creepy. They seemed to keep to themselves. Until later in that season we had 2 creepy encounters. The first happened to my good friend. He had made a quick day trip with his wife up to the property to fill feeders and ride 4-wheelers. To get to the spot, he has to get on the dirt road and drive past the meth house. His spot is only a few hundred yards away from the house. While they were doing their thing, they began to hear some strange noises. And as he listened closer, he could hear high-pitched gibberish between 3 voices yelling weird words in Arabic and with Jesus mixed in. They decided to get on the 4-wheeler and investigate. They found 2 men squatted down besides a large mud pile in front of the house. They were splashing and bouncing around while furiously speaking gibberish. Once they noticed the 4-wheeler, they stopped and stared like animals. My buddy quickly took off. The second encounter happened to me and my brother. We were up there alone for the weekend and were relaxing by the fire on a pitch black night after a long day's hunt. We began to hear something strange in the distance. It was pipe organ music. It wasn't a recording of a pipe organ, but somebody actually playing one. They were missing notes and sporadically starting and stopping. We laughed about how it was like something out of a horror film, but the music continues for hours. Then all of a sudden, we hear crashing through the brush. Now we're actually in a very thick area of brush. It is between our camp and the direction of our house. This doesn't sound like the usual spooked deer or armadillo roaming around, or hogs even. It's made by something very large. Now the rest of the night it's quiet, and there's no more organ music, and we don't know what caused this. Now not too much has happened since then, but we've made a point never to go there alone, but to maybe one day scout it out overnight. The summer before 2nd grade, my family and I moved into Olympia, WA. I with my parents and my older sister back then. My sister is 2 years older than me, so she would have been in the 4th grade. My sister celebrated her 10th birthday that same year by having a handful of friends over for a sleepover. We owned a trampoline back then and often had sleepovers and used the trampoline during the summer months. We lived near a forest. Now we have many fond memories of sleeping on the trampoline under the stars, but this was not one of those fond memories. Seeing as it was my sister's party, I was younger and the annoying brother am not invited to the trampoline party. I do, however, remember how the events unfolded. It all began when around 6 or so girls came fleeing inside screaming about a man in the woods. A backyard at this house was fenced off to the left and right side, but was not fenced on the backside as our backyard continued into a beautiful forest backdrop. According to the girls, as they're out on the trampoline enjoying their sleepover, a man in a yellow rain jacket appeared in the woods. The random creepy man proceeded to stand there in the woods and stare at the 10-year-old girls the whole time they're out there. He didn't respond to them when they attempted addressing him or even break eye contact. It was at this point that the girls were so scared they collectively ran as fast as they could inside. After the girls relayed their experience to my parents and I, the 3 of us reached to the window to see this man. When we get to the window, all we can see is a glimpse of the yellow jacket as he disappeared further into the forest, beyond the borderline of the neighbouring fence, out of sight. My dad sprinted outside yelling at the man, threatening him, calling the police but we can't see him. My parents did call the police and filed a report, but nothing ever come of it. After this experience, our parents thought twice about letting us sleep on the trampoline at night. We ended up moving a year later. When I was quite young, maybe 9 or 10, my mum, sister, who's about 4 or 5, and I went for a walk in the forest. It was a large forest, well known for camping and having picnics, and we had walked through there many times before. The 3 of us walked for quite some time until we found a spot to have a picnic. After eating our food, we explored the various mushrooms and trees dotted around the place. When it started to roll over into late afternoon, we decided it was time to head back, and we made the walk back to the forest. There was always an eerie feeling when you're in the forest, in any forest no matter where. When we arrived back, we're shocked to see police cars everywhere and hear sirens. We had no idea what happened, but nevertheless, we got back into our car and drove home. I was wondering what could have happened the entire night back, when finally, my questions are answered. My mum and I sat down to watch the 7 o'clock news and found out that while we're having a picnic, the police had discovered a body buried in a shallow grave in that very forest. The reporter explained that the men involved were doing stuff with drugs and other criminal activities. As I was quite young when all this occurred, I didn't think much of it. Sure, I was creeped out, but I didn't completely understand it. Looking back now, it gives me chills thinking about it. I often wonder what would have happened if we were the ones to discover the body. I've been really wanting to share this story for some time now, but haven't found a good outlet until coming across here. About 5 years ago, my wife and I went on a weekend camping trip with our 2 closest friends, another married couple. The campsite is just outside of Yosemite and really beautiful. The beauty of it and creepiness of it is that you take a dirt road for about an hour and a half off the main road to get to it. It's extremely secluded, but never felt threatening. It's a really popular campsite, so there's always people around, especially in the summer. The first day was awesome. I don't remember exactly what we did, but I remembered having a great time there. The campsites are fairly close together and usually separated by various shrubs, etc. I thought we were all getting pretty pumped up about the site as there were no neighbours around the sites just forest, and no one occupying the site closest to us. This isn't common, as these campgrounds stay fully booked throughout the summer. Day 2 started normally. We had breakfast and then head to the lake for a couple hours. The lake was about a 20-minute hike from the main campground. We ended up getting back at around 2ish, and we noticed that the site next over to us had a silver rented car parked on it. We didn't think much of it, and went about a fire. At some point, we noticed the occupants of the site next to us. It's a pretty average looking white dude, maybe early 40s. He was so average looking that it's hard to even picture him. We all immediately caught on to the fact that he was constantly looking over at us. My friend Dave even made a comment to me under his breath saying, "You notice that guy keeps looking here." I remembered feeling uncomfortable as we're all in our bathing suits from the lake. But I make a conscious effort just to ignore it. It's worth mentioning that we're a little buzzed/drunk, not out of control, just feeling good. Throughout the afternoon and into the evening, we continued to notice the guy constantly staring at us. In hindsight, Dave or I should have called him out. The story doesn't make us look great, but whatever. I had been stressed at work prior to the trip and really didn't want to let some creepy dude throw off my relaxed vibes. The alcohol coupled with the fact that we honestly kind of felt bad for him led to us not confronting it. I just thought he was a lonely dude. Aside from the start, there were a couple of mildly weird incidents that occurred leading up to the very weird stuff. The first was that at some point, he left his site to go and do whatever. When he was gone, a girl, probably in her mid-20s, about our age, walked by it and snapped a picture of his license plate. I remember asking her if she needed anything. She smiled and awkwardly kept going. Dave and I both thought it's odd, but we're preoccupied with beer. Later in the evening, around 7ish, the camp host was doing her round checks on people. She kept checking us in and moved on to him. I remembered all of us eavesdropping intently to what they're saying. I think we just wanted to hear what this creep sounded like. He kept asking questions about the bathhouse. We didn't know there was a bathhouse, or even what a bathhouse was. But he had 100 different questions about it. Where is it? When's it open? Is it private? Which are not weird, but in context, definitely odd. The sun started to go down. We're all drunk, so weren't too concerned with the creepy dude anymore. At one point, we went for a walk and I noticed him snooping around what we believed to be the bathhouse. Now, I would call out this kind of behaviour, but again, I was drunk and 5 years stupider at the time. We all continued to laugh and talk about how creepy he was. Now, we have a good time and keep drinking. At one point, the guy started eating beans aggressively out of a can in the light of his single lantern, no fire. He looked at us while doing so, and Dave and I noticed this and kind of snicker at each other about how weird it is. Eventually, compose yourself. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. I think the guy had left his site at this point. I remember joking, saying, "I better not wake up to that guy looking in our window." My wife and I slept in our SUV with the seats folded down. Dave and Sarah slept in the camper shell of their truck. I remembered feeling creeped out as I fell asleep, but shrugged it off. Around 2 a.m, both my wife and I were jolted awake by what we thought was a woman's scream. We both looked at each other and asked if each other heard that. We come to the conclusion that it was probably somebody trying to be loud, and decided to go back to sleep. As I was trying to sleep, I start feeling very unsettled. I decided to get out of the car and take a look around. I checked my door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I'd gotten about one leg out of the car when I heard faint but direct whispering coming from Dave and Sarah's camper shell about 4 feet away. I froze and then heard it again. I eventually realised that they were trying to tell me something. I whispered, "What?" And I heard Dave say, "Can you hear that? Start your car." I instantly realised that something is wrong. So rather than ask questions, I climbed back into my car and started right away. Dave and Sarah busted out of the back of the camper and frantically jumped into my car. They tell me drive. They were too freaked out to even explain anything. Eventually I pulled over, figuring we're far enough away from whatever had freaked them out. Now finally, Sarah calmed down enough to tell us what happened. As she put it, she was woken by a light coming from a creepy dude's campsite. Apparently, he had lanterns and flashlights to spotlight himself, naked, staring in our direction. It gets weirder. At some point, he turns off the lights and tries to signal across to us. I'm talking like Morse code or something. Across the ravine, an old RV begins using its headlights to signal back. Dave is awake now. I question them on this detail, and they're both very clear they were communicating. Keep in mind, it's absolutely pitch black out. After a few minutes, they heard footsteps around their car, followed by a hard tap on the window. This is what caused Sarah to scream, hence waking me up. At this point, I decide we need to call the police. The problem was, there was absolutely zero cell service at the campsite. Furthermore, it was about an hour and a half up an old camp service road that was already very remote. So leaving at night wasn't an option. We decided the best course of action was to alert the camp host. We drove around and eventually found the trailer she lived in. She was understandably confused to be woken up at 3:30 in the morning, but was responsive. She mentioned that the guy was really weird when she even checked him in, and she called the police on her satellite phone. Apparently, there was a massive wildfire burning that weekend, and the police can't even send anyone until sunrise. The camp host said there wasn't really anything she could do beyond that. It really sucked to hear that. Now, I don't know what we can do, not to mention there's still that guy in the RV. One more thing really weird happened. It's around 4 AM. We're all sitting in my car when a man in a hood walked right up to the window, and the second I noticed him, I turned on my engine and headlights. I'm not kidding you, he bolted off into the trees. We all sat in my car until sunrise, once the light was out. We went back to the site to pack up our things. His car was there with blankets hung in all the windows. The whole thing just felt gross and we wanted to get out of there, so quickly leave. After a couple of hours we left, I get a call from the police. They said they went out to the campsite and questioned the guy. He said he was simply showering. The cop told me there was nothing he could do. It was our words against his. He questioned the RV people. They said they didn't know anything, but he mentioned a quote, "A very rude camper screamed in the middle of the night." The whole experience with the police is frustrating. I tried following up. I even tried getting help from a family member who's a sheriff, but even he said there wasn't anything they could do unless that particular police chief really wanted to investigate. So there's my story. I learnt a lesson about being polite when somebody's making you feel uncomfortable. Nowadays, I'm much more aggressive with crazy people. I also know it's not easy to hear this story and wonder why Dave or myself didn't just confront the guy, especially when he's literally naked near us. I don't know. I wish I had more courage, but honestly, it's really scary in the moment and you have no idea what their potential is. I'm okay admitting that. Clearly we were dealing with a very messed up person who had accomplices. I can only imagine their end goal. I hate to think of it. I just wish the police could have acted better. This happened in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time, out hunting deer with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. Now, I do remember this day like it was yesterday. My dad and I had a few different stands over in an area of maybe about 3/4 square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I'd been going with him since I was 5, up until I was about 12, which is the legal age to hunt with a rifle. This particular morning, we walked to my first stand. It's about 5 in the morning, so pretty dark out. I got situated and my dad and Frank went off to our other two stands over a ridge, maybe another 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always eerie. Now not long after they left, I see a flashlight off in the direction that they left. It's always eerie in these situations. It's roughly 200 yards away now, moving in my direction. I figure they forgot something from the truck or I don't know, so I decide to radio to see what they're doing. We're sitting in the stand. Frank's about to head to another one. He says, obviously this flashlight is somebody else. Now this isn't super uncommon, and isn't really a big deal. The woods get crowded sometimes, and there is a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other person knows I'm here. I ended up dozing off though, as it's pretty dark out. Now when I wake up, the sun's up. It's around 8 AM, and I sit there for a bit. I radio my dad to see if he's heard or seen anything moving. Nothing yet. There's a couple of gunshots off in the distance. I get up, go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving again. Then, not far away, maybe 30 yards out, I decide to return. When I come back to my sound, I sit down and take a real good look around. I have the feeling that I'm being watched, but nothing's going on. I finally look out to my left when I saw a big flashlight and something orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during the gun season. I radio to my dad and Frank to see if either one of them are here. My dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank and decide to grab my binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. This is not Frank, and this guy is looking at me through his scope. Rifle aimed directly at me, which is a massive no-no. You never point your rifle at anyone under any circumstances. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens, which is why normal people like us use binoculars. At first I'm like, what an idiot. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't point the gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking that he might shoot me. I slowly grab my rifle, get up and stay behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand is on this kind of little knot. It's on the side of a much larger hill. I radio to my dad and tell him what's up. He says sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I can't do that and keep looking. Every time I look, he's aiming at me. He's always in different spots, still moving to my direction. I go back to look again, and he would be 30 yards away from the last time. A good 10 minutes of this happened, and my dad radios to me, "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he's obviously trying to keep me calm at the thought that something serious might happen. He's still there but keeps moving. I don't know his problem. My dad tells me just keep hidden, he'll figure it out, that he'll be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear the shot. I lose my mind trying to get hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where is he? Did he have to shoot this guy? What's going on? I sit there for maybe 3 minutes. Feels like hours, and I hear, "Alright, coming out and head towards my stand." I peek over and I see my dad waving from alongside the ridge that the guy's been on. It turns out, Frank had been really restless and took a stroll and ended up on the other side of that particular ridge that the stranger's on, not knowing he's there. He knocked his radio batteries loose and couldn't communicate with us. Turned out the shot was actually Frank shooting a deer. My dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off from towards us, then to the logging road out of sight. I was driving late at night on the I-90 between Deer Lodge and Missoula, MT. I'm originally from Seattle and I was driving back to Seattle after visiting family in Bozeman and Billings. The stretch of freeway between Deer Lodge and Missoula has some weird small mountain towns along either side. It's occasionally interrupted by large truck stops. Anyway, it's about 11:30 at night, and I'm on my way to my hotel in Missoula when I notice that I need some gas. I stop off in this random small town with one gas station with a 24-hour pump. It had a convenience store attached to it, but it was closed. I get this really weird vibe from the station as soon as I pull up to the pump. I hadn't turned off my car yet. I just put it in park and the engine was still running. I was about to shut off my car when, out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark figure come from the side of the closed convenience store, literally running at my car. Some instinct actually kicks in, and I pull my car back into drive and get the hell out of there. I look back in my rearview mirror to see the figure chasing after my car for a few seconds, but by that time, I make that turn and get back onto the freeway. I literally can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed for the rest of my drive either. Now this happened in 2009, so while smartphones did exist, they weren't as prevalent or as good as they are today. Even with my flip phone that I have at the time, I can't even get signal on it. Secondly, the events at the gas station happened in a span of about 20 seconds. Yeah, really quick. I arrive, park, turn off the car, see the dark figure running towards my car, and I put my car back into drive, burn rubber to get out of there, and I see the dark figure chasing after my car, tearing up on the freeway. And finally, someone mentioned the story of the Wendigo, and I've heard about it, but I wasn't isolated up in the mountains, and this was less than 30 seconds away from the freeway, so I don't really think it was that. I think the dark figure was a desperate meth head looking to rob someone or hurt someone. After you've driven hundreds of miles, your brain doesn't really think straight, but I don't know what it could have been. All I know is that it terrified me, and I still think about it to this day. I was walking on a trail in the Crater Lake to get back to my car, and as I'm doing so, I hear somebody running behind me. I look, and it's an older man by himself. I quicken my pace as the sun is setting, and it would soon be dark. He stops running, and starts up again, getting closer, and I do the same, trying to keep distance. It felt creepy, and I was so thankful when I saw another woman with a big dog not too far in front of me. I met up with her, and eventually, so did the guy. We all walk together now, and this man is very strange and socially awkward. He had a camera. I'm certain the woman and I had the same creepy feeling from the exchanges we'd given each other. She said if he came here alone, and he replies that his family's already down the hill waiting for him. I immediately felt very ill when I heard this. And then, the really weird thing happened. He took at least 3 pictures of the woman and I. I could have asked him to delete them, but honestly, he probably never would have done so. And I just wanted to get back to my car, because he's making me feel very uncomfortable. We finally reached the bottom of the hill, and I noticed that there's no family in sight for him. He gets in his car alone and drives off. I felt very lucky there was another person there with me. I'm sure he was some kind of predator. So I went on a backcamping trip in some youth program in North Cascades near Seattle. One of us got hurt from falling on a rock on our way to the base camp, so I had to help carry him back to the trailhead while being accompanied by one of the leaders. On the way back, we came across another young hiker, a woman. We talk as we're kind of taking a rest. She said she was going to summit one of the peaks on the trail later. The problem is, that's about 8 hours away. and she only has a light backpack. Now the next day, back at base camp, helicopters swarmed, and men were dropping. It was like a movie. I was taken back. Little did I know, there was a huge search and rescue looking for the same woman I interacted with just hours before. For 3 days every night, all I would hear was the distant calls of men yelling out her name, echoing off the basin walls in an endless search. I remembered hearing it was supposed to be a suicide, that she was a seasoned hiker, yet she didn't pack properly enough. It didn't make sense. Perhaps she just wanted to go a little bit further than stay. I remembered after I flew home I would never stop thinking of her, and I never stopped. I still look her up, just to see that she is never found, that she's not with her family, and I hate that. You just have to be really careful when you're hiking. This was a few years ago in October, actually around the time the nationwide clown stuff was happening. It's hunting season, and I'm driving to a town north of where I live to meet my dad and ride with him in his truck. It's about 4 AM. Now when I pull off the freeway, I'm waiting for the light to turn green when I see a dude cross the road. Totally normal. I pull away and turn into the parking lot for the usual meeting spot, a park and ride situation. I turn off my car and wait for my dad. I took off towards the main road, and that's when I see a young guy walking towards my car. It's October and really cold, so I can't even see out the windows well. He just continues walking right up next to me until he's about 15 feet away from my car. He just stood there maybe for 10 minutes motionless, just staring at me. I wasn't even too spooked. Like I said, it was hunting season, so I can defend myself, but after 10 minutes, he turns around and walks away, literally never to be seen again. To this day, I still have no idea who he was or what he wanted from me.